9. Kayaking nightmare. 32-year-old Amy Abraham was among 9 people who were suddenly swept into the water by a flash flood while kayaking in Hawaii in 2016. It happened on the Wailua River, where the pharmaceutical saleswoman and her sister, Crystal, were on a guided excursion with 7 other tourists. They were crossing a place called Uluwaihi Falls with the help of a rope when the flood came out of nowhere, sweeping them downstream. Everyone who was thrown into the water survived except Amy, whose body was found the next day. Peter Fisher, who owns the Kayak Wailua Tour Group company, told Hawaii News Now that the incident was really freakish because there was no rain during their kayaking trip or on the hike they took beforehand. A post on the company's Facebook page described the flash flood as an extremely rare event that transformed slow-moving shallow water to deep, raging rapids in the blink of an eye. According to Fisher, a flash flood warning was issued long after the group started their outing. Speaking with local station KITV, he described the day as going from sunny and happy to a nightmare, and said that sometimes the worst unfortunately happens, even when a person does everything they can to prepare and plan for an activity. 8. Death Valley Deluge. Straddling the border between California and Nevada, Death Valley National Park is the lowest, driest, and hottest location in the U.S. During the month of August, the region receives an average of just 0.11 inches, 0.27 centimeters of rain. In August 2022, however, Death Valley got a staggering 1.46 inches, 3.7 centimeters of rain. It may not sound like much, but it's nearly 3/4 the amount the area typically gets in an entire year. And without enough soil to break up the rain, things can become catastrophic very quickly. The sudden influx of rain triggered a series of flash floods that left 1,000 tourists and their vehicles stranded in the park. Some were lucky enough to seek refuge in their hotel rooms, while other visitors' rooms were flooded. The floodwaters receded within hours, but left parts of the road covered in sediment, boulders, and vehicles remained trapped. Many cars were left damaged, including some that had been hit by other vehicles and dumpsters that were moved by the water. Luckily, the emergency response was fast and effective, and there were no recorded injuries or deaths. The flash floods were caused by an annual event called the Southwest Monsoon, which pushes a surge of humidity into dry deserts of the southwestern United States. While the storm is historically known to cause some major downpours, the 2022 monsoon was particularly intense. And while this brought some much-needed rain to the chronically drought-stricken region, the effects of receiving too much too fast can be dangerous and potentially deadly. 7. Swept into a storm drain. In a moment of sheer terror that was captured on camera, a young woman named Alejandra Terrazas del Val slipped beneath the surface of a flash flood in 2019 and never re-emerged. The incident happened in Culiacan, Sinaloa in northwestern Mexico, after heavy rains caused a deluge of floodwater to fill the streets. Surveillance footage showed the teenager, who was a local volleyball star, trying to grab the outstretched arm of a woman who was standing next to a car nearby. But the current proved too strong, and Alejandra was sucked into an open sewer without warning. A search team was dispatched to search for her, and what started as a rescue mission quickly turned into a recovery effort. In the aftermath of her death, locals revealed that the gaping hole in the sidewalk had been there for 3 years, and that authorities ignored their repeated requests to have it fixed. Culiacan Mayor Jesus Estrada Ferrero said that he was unaware of how severe the hole was, and that he would have sent someone to fix it if he had known the extent of the damage. He accepted responsibility for Alejandra's death on behalf of the city government. The hole was repaired shortly after the flash flood, but many found it unfortunate that it took a needless tragedy for anything to be done about it. 6. 2021 HENAN floods. From July 17th to July 31st, 2021, China's Henan province received its highest recorded amount of hourly rainfall since measurements began in 1951, as the rate climbed to 7.95 inches, 20 centimeters per hour. All 13 of Henan's reservoirs filled to capacity. Over a 3-day period, the region received nearly the same amount of rain it typically gets in a year, resulting in flash floods in Zhengzhou, a city of 12 million and other populated areas. As you can imagine, the results were nothing short of catastrophic. Footage surfaced on social media showing cars being pushed and floating around the street, as well as Zhengzhou metro passengers standing in waist-deep water. More than 200 vehicles were trapped inside a road tunnel. Authorities in Zhengzhou issued their highest-level warnings and emergency response levels, as they grew increasingly concerned that the city's storm drain system was incapable of handling the amount of water flowing through the streets. More than 400,000 cars in Zhengzhou were damaged, and 398 people were reported dead or missing. The final count included at least 320 people who died in the flood, 50 who were declared missing, and at least 39 who died in underground areas, including parking garages and the subway. Tens of thousands of survivors were displaced by the floods. An investigation found that some Henan officials purposely underreported the number of deaths, making the exact number of casualties unclear. Dozens of politicians were disciplined, as well as several executives of municipally owned construction companies. In addition to demanding more honesty in the future, authorities called for improved flood controls and better emergency preparedness in the affected areas. 5. Hellish hiking trip. Located in southern Italy's Calabria region, the Raganello Gorge is popular among hiking enthusiasts for its semi-aquatic excursions, which take hikers through partially submerged areas. During one of these treks in 2018, a heavy rainfall at the top of the canyon triggered a flash flood, submerging some parts of the gorge in water more than 6.5 feet, 2 meters deep. At least 11 people were killed. Of the 23 hikers who were rescued, 11 were hospitalized. Shortly after the disaster struck, news outlets reported that at least 3 people were still missing, but that the actual number might be even higher, since some people often hike the trail without a guide. Less than 2 months later, in early October 2018, another round of heavy rains caused flash floods in various parts of southern Italy, including Calabria and Sicily. The streets in some towns and cities became raging rivers, flooding homes and businesses and destroying bridges. Families were forced to evacuate as the floods triggered landslides. 16 people were rescued from rooftops, where they had desperately sought refuge from the rapidly rising waters. At least 36 people died, including a woman and her 2 children who were in a car crash, and another woman whose vehicle was swept away by the flood. 4. A family tragedy. During the spring and summer of 2022, a large area of New Mexico was destroyed by the state's largest and most destructive recorded wildfire. More than 900 structures were destroyed, including many homes, as the blaze raged on for more than 3 months. Just as firefighters had the blaze mostly under control, unusually heavy rains fell on the region for a week, at rates of up to an inch an hour. Flash floods barraged the area, sweeping away and destroying anything that wasn't already ruined from the fire. 62-year-olds Jane and Chris Cummings, and Jane's mother, 84-year-old Betty Greenhaw, were visiting their cabin in the Tecolote Canyon when the flooding occurred. Jane's daughter, Michelle Post, told Texas-based news station KCBD that the trio were aware of the flooding risk within the canyon. In the past, they had prepared by laying sandbags at the property. But the family likely didn't expect the disaster to be life-threatening, and within minutes, the water filled the cabin with 8 feet, 2.4 meters of water, and swept the structure away. Jane, Chris, and Betty died in the flash flood. A witness who owns a nearby property told Michelle that they heard the water rush in, and by the time they turned around to look, It had covered the cabin's entire front door. Rescuers immediately began searching for the family, but it was unfortunately too late. After being in the family for more than 60 years, the cabin was now marked by tragedy, and the victims' surviving loved ones were left to grapple with their devastating losses. 3. Traumatic Cave Tube Tour. 39-year-old Julio Escobar had 20 years of experience under his belt, working as a guide who took tourists on water tubing tours along Belize's rivers. He was leading one of these tours in the Cayo district on Christmas Eve 2022, when a flash flood struck his group. Initial reports claimed that Escobar was flung from his tube and swept away by the river's current. According to a Belize Police Department spokesperson, Escobar was trying to lead his group to a shallower part of the river when he was overpowered by the current. Emergency responders recovered his body several hours later. The flash flood wasn't entirely surprising. The weather report predicted heavier than usual rainfalls, but tours were heavily booked and nevertheless proceeded to take place. Other tubers reported incidents similar to that experienced by Escobar's group, but his death was the only known fatality to occur. At least 200 tourists were in the river when its level rapidly rose by several feet. To escape the dangerous rapids, they took emergency routes, used ropes, and deployed canoes to rescue those who were too scared to cross the most intense currents. Tour guide Oscar Carbajal told 7 News that the local guides have a brotherhood of sorts, where they work together to keep themselves and tourists safe. They pool their resources together and distribute life jackets, canoes, and other supplies to each other's groups as needed. This type of camaraderie and preparedness enables them to respond to dangerous situations with life-saving swiftness and skill. 2. Catastrophic flooding in the Congo. In late 2022, an all-night torrential downpour fell on Kinshasa, the Democratic Republic of Congo's capital city, resulting in deadly flash floods, landslides, and sinkholes. Entire neighborhoods were submerged, while roads and houses were destroyed and swept away, including one of the region's main highways. At least 141 of Kinshasa's 15 million residents died in the disaster. Around 40,000 households were flooded, and nearly 300 homes collapsed. Many of the victims perished beneath collapsing homes during landslides. Kinshasa is one of Africa's largest megacities. It's undergone rapid growth and unregulated development in recent decades, making it prone to flooding, a tendency that's being exacerbated by climate change. The recent disaster came 3 years after another deadly torrential downpour triggered flash floods in some of Kinshasa's low-lying districts. 39 people died, and several buildings and roads collapsed. Adding to the costliness that comes with the sheer destruction of a flash flood, the catastrophe caused a major transportation disruption that came at a cost of an estimated $1.2 million per day. In one of the world's poorest countries, where well over half the population lives on just $2.15 per day, a natural disaster like this can plunge millions of struggling people into dire hunger. Other cities in Western and Central Africa have experienced similar flood-related problems in recent years. 2 months prior to the flooding in the Congo, the capital city of Chad, N'Djamena, was so heavily flooded that it was only possible to navigate by boat. Nigeria also experienced its worst flooding in decades, destroying 200,000 homes and displacing around 1 million residents. These trends are expected to worsen in the future as climate change accelerates destructive weather patterns. In 2022, Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi called on polluting countries to keep their word on their commitments to fight climate change. Although it's just one of several factors that are to blame for the devastating consequences of the flash floods. 1. Historic Maryland floods. On July 30th, 2016, 6 inches, 15 centimeters of rain dumped on Ellicott City, Maryland, and the surrounding area in just 2 hours. Soon enough, a flash flood came barreling down the city's main street, filling and damaging homes, businesses, sidewalks, and landmarks. 6 buildings were completely destroyed. The disaster claimed 2 victims: 35-year-old Jessica Watsula, who was in town from Pennsylvania visiting family, and 38-year-old Joseph Blevins. Howard County Executive Alan Kittleman told the Associated Press that it was the worst flooding he had seen in his 50 years living in the country. Main Street remained closed for more than 2 months while cleanup and repair efforts were undertaken. The flash flood was initially thought to be a freak, once-in-a-thousand-year event, but local councilman John Weinstein feared that something similar could happen in the future. He pushed for a ban on further development in the area, but the proposal failed to go through. Weinstein's prediction proved eerily accurate just 2 years later in 2018, when more than 8 inches, 20 centimeters of rain fell on Ellicott City and the surrounding region over a 2-hour period, the same amount that the area typically receives over a 2-month span. Water levels in the nearby Patapsco River reached a record-breaking high. At the time, the city was working on implementing a new flood alert system, but it hadn't gone into operation yet. Entire buildings collapsed and roads were washed away as more than 10 feet, 3 meters of water once again flowed down the city's main thoroughfare, leaving Ellicott City back to square one with rebuilding. At least 30 people were rescued. Sergeant Edison Eddie Hermond died when he was swept away by the current. Thanks for watching. Have you ever experienced anything like a flash flood? Tell us about it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.